All right, welcome those who've joined. Say hello in the chat, especially if you're new, so that we get to know you. As usual, we'll wait a couple minutes for people to come in. Also, how's my audio coming in, video, everything good? Hello, Jayanta. Welcome. Hello, Elaine. Risaka, I hope you're recovering well still from your surgery. Hello, an ancient path. Oh, coming in right with the question. All right. We'll look at that question after we do our chanting and introduction. Hello, Bella and Gautam. Welcome. And Yankee. Oh, Dharma learner. Good to see you. Well, Dharma learner, I'm here and I'm leaving June 11th. So if you can get here before June 11th, you'll be able to see me. So 3 more weeks, basically, I'm here. All right, we'll give it another minute or so, but then we'll get started. I've been on Monk Chat the last 3 weeks. Have you missed Monk Chat for a while? Ancient Path? Well, I guess the last 2 weeks. Elaine says, 2 years ago tonight, I found Dhammapalooza. Very good. I'm happy you've been with us for these 2 years. All right. That's a 5-minute mark, so we can get started. Well, Dhammapalooza is, I think I started Dhammapalooza April 2020. It was right at the beginning of the lockdowns for the most part. Right. So 2020, 2021, 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023. So we have 3 years that we've been doing this. All right, so let's get the chanting up. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Ahung ve saranang yanti pabbhatani vanani cha arammarukka chatyani manusa bhayatajjita. Netang ko saranang kemang, netang saranang uttamang, netang saranang agamma sabba dukkha pamucchati. Yocha buddhan cha dhamman cha sanghang cha saranang gato, chattari ariya satchani sammapanyaya passati. Dukkam dukkha samuppadang dukkassa cha atikkamang, aryanchitangikam maggam dukkupasamagamminang. Etang ko saranang kemang, etang saranang uttamang, etang saranang agamma sabba dukkha pamucchati. All right, English. The supreme refuge. They go to many a refuge, those who have been struck by fear. They go to the mountains and forests, to parks and trees and shrines. But none of these is a secure refuge. None is the refuge supreme. Not by relying on such a refuge can one be freed from all suffering. But one who has gone for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha sees with perfect wisdom the Four Noble Truths: suffering, the arising of suffering, the transcending of suffering, and the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to suffering's final end. This is the refuge that is secure. This is the refuge that is supreme. By relying on such a refuge as this, one is released from all suffering. I quite love this. This was part of the daily chanting at Bhavana Society, and I like this section so much that I've kept it in when I made the Maggasekha chanting book. And this really points to what is the true refuge, right? This is something that you see when you see that there is no actual refuge in the world. This doesn't even say that the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha is the true refuge. What's the true refuge? Fully understanding and knowing the Four Noble Truths. Awakening, that is the true refuge. So it's wonderful, beautiful. And this is why I always joke that the irony of going for a refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha is going for a refuge to the fact that there is no refuge. As you understand with wisdom, then you know the only refuge is ending the samsaric journey. That's it. All right, friends. Let's see here. Welcome, Metika and Gretchen. Okay, friends. Well, we have come to another Monday night. That means it's time for Dhammapalooza, the 2-hour festival of Dhamma with the Maggasekha community. This 2-hour festival of Dhamma includes a variety of different activities, from chanting to sutta reading to Dhamma talks, Q&A, and even some meditation. So this is the time for the community to decide and to see how this Dhammapalooza is going to go today. Right? I never put a topic. You notice I never put a topic because I don't know what the topic is going to be. I don't know if this is going to be an hour and a half of mostly questions and answers, or nobody's going to ever have a question and we just read suttas, or somebody wants to give a Dhamma talk, or wants to have the community have a discussion. It's all up in the air, and it's all possible here at Dhammapalooza. So I will give some time for the community to type in the chat any questions they have, any topics you'd like me to discuss, etc. Ancient Path already did put in a question, so we can probably go to that. Ancient Path asks, is Monk Chat on the Buddhist Insight channel? Yeah, it's Monk Chat is Friday night. Monk Chat is Buddhist Insights. Is Empty Cloud. Yeah. So can we give any weight to other traditions that use sutras outside of the canon? Or are they in direct contradiction with the Buddha's words? Yes, even Theravadins are in direct contradiction of the Buddha's words in many ways. At least if you take the early Buddhist text as your foundation. So I would say that the early Buddhist texts are the heritage of all Buddhists, whatever the tradition is, and the early Buddhist texts are present and found in all traditions. And all traditions almost equally don't put much weight in them. So this is something that is to be understood. So I'm not a Theravada fundamentalist. You're not going to see me say, "Oh, Theravada is the best, Mahayana is the worst," or anything like that. That's not. Each person is up to decide what they want to practice and how they want to follow. Well, for me personally, especially, I take everything, every teacher that I hear teach, every scripture that I see outside of the early texts, I judge that person's teachings, and I judge those scriptures by the early texts. And sometimes it's in line with the early texts, and sometimes it's not. So there's a whole number of teachers that I just don't spend any time listening to because they don't teach in line with what I find to be the most important thing, and that's okay. No problem. Other people really like to hear those teachers teach. That's how it goes. So, are they in direct contradiction to the Buddha's words? If we're being honest, we really can't say 100% that we know the Buddha's words. The early Buddhist texts are about as close as we're going to get to the actual words of the Buddha. And most people who study the early Buddhist texts have a level of confidence that at least a very huge chunk of what's in those texts is probably the word of the Buddha, or close enough to. I mean, in places like Sri Lanka, they'll say this is Buddha Vachana. This is the word of the Buddha. But that's where we're at on that. Looks like we have a friend from Twitch saying hello. Hey, what's up, G? This is why I like streaming on Twitch, because you never know what kind of interesting person is going to come up. I might be the only Buddhist monk that streams on Twitch, although I wouldn't be surprised if I'm not. So Ancient Path says, have you heard of disabled persons ordaining? I myself have severely vision impaired from birth. Depends on the disability. Depends on the place. There are a lot of conditions that a person can have in life that will disqualify you from becoming a monastic. And so what I would do is, if it is something that you're interested in ordaining, I would talk to places and see what they say. Because even outside of the Vinaya rules, different places have different levels and abilities to support things like disabilities. So I would check with the places that you're interested in ordaining in. All right. Well, the chat is a little quiet tonight, so why don't we read a sutta? And then after the sutta, we'll see if there's any other questions or anything. Or if not, then maybe we'll do some meditation. We'll read quite a famous sutta. It's called the Madhupendika Sutta, the Honey Cake Sutta. Let me share screen here. It's Majjhima Nikaya number 18. Visakha says, I thought I knew the Four Noble Truths until the last few weeks. Well, this is an important thing to understand. The only beings who really know the Four Noble Truths are awakened beings. Everybody else is trying to understand the Four Noble Truths. Even I cannot claim that I fully understand the Four Noble Truths. Thought I knew the Four Noble Truths until the last few weeks where I have been suffering physically and mentally. Dawned on me tonight, I am suffering because I am craving to do things I cannot do. Yes. You have gained some insight and wisdom. Very good. Keep going. Keep reflecting on these things, investigating these things. So let's get started. So for those of you who know Bhavana, you might, if you visited Bhavana, you might have met the cat. The cat's probably dead by now. It was being kept alive by medicines. It was pretty old when I was at Bhavana, and that's almost, over 3 years ago now. But the cat's name was Madhu. Madhu was not very honey-like. It was kind of an ironic name. All right. So I have heard at one time the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sakyans, near Kapilavatthu, in the Banyan Tree Monastery. So the Buddha was on his home turf. Hello, Joshi. Welcome. Then the Buddha robed up in the morning and taking his bowl and robe, entered Kapilavatthu for alms. He wandered for alms in Kapilavatthu. After the meal, on his return from alms round, he went to the great wood. Plunged deep into it, and sat at the root of a young wood apple tree for the day's meditation. Dandapani the Sakyan, while going for a walk, plunged deep into the great wood. He approached the Buddha and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he stood to one side, leaning on his staff, and said to the Buddha, "What does the ascetic teach? What does he explain?" Visakha is like, "Yeah, sutta, all right." "Sir, my teaching is such that one does not conflict with anyone in this world, with its gods and maras and brahmas, this population with its ascetics and brahmins, its gods and humans. And it is such that perceptions do not underlie the Brahmin who lives detached from sensual pleasures, without doubting, stripped of worry, and rid of craving for rebirth in this or that state. That is what I teach, and that's what I explain." And so it should be understood here. Oh, hey, Anthony. Good to see you, my friend. It should be understood here that when the Buddha is talking about perceptions does not underlie the Brahmin who lives detached from sensual pleasures. He's not talking about Brahmins. Remember that he's using this word to mean a person who has essentially either become awakened or a highly attained state. That is what I teach, and that is what I explain. When he had spoken, Dandapani shook his head, waggled his tongue, raised his eyebrow until his brow puckered in 3 furrows, and he departed, leaving on his staff. So obviously Dandapani did not care for what the Buddha had told him here. This is the first time I think I'm reading Bhante Sujata's translation here. I don't remember exactly what Bhikkhu Bodhi translated. Yeah, sure. What is Bhikkhu Bodhi for this Dandapani's response?
Sorry, which? He wagged his tongue?
Yeah,
raised his eyebrows until his forehead was puckered in 3 lines?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that line.
Yeah.
That's what. Okay, so it looks like the translations are pretty close. And he departed, leaning on his staff. Then, in the late afternoon, the Buddha came out of retreat and went to the banyan tree monastery, sat down on the seat spread out, and told the mendicants what had happened. All right. If you want, it might be best to close the doors. Yeah. Okay. When he had spoken, one of the mendicants said to him, "But sir, what is the teaching such that the Buddha does not conflict with anyone in this world, with its gods, maras, and brahmins, this population with its ascetics and brahmins, its gods and humans?" This is one of my favorite lines that the Buddha says. Right? A practitioner of the Dhamma does not conflict, does not argue with anyone in the world. This is such a wonderful line. This is a line that when I first read, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is how I want to be." I'm tired of conflicting with people and arguing with people. That's exhausting. They argue with me, the Buddha says. I do not argue with them. And so he's asked here, what does it mean, the statement that you said? And how is it that perceptions do not underlie the Buddha, the Brahmin who lives detached from sensual pleasures? So here this person is calling the Buddha a Brahmin, right? Without indecision, stripped of worry, and rid of craving for rebirth in this or that state. So the Buddha responds, "Mendicants, a person is beset by concepts of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions." This is a complicated statement. What exactly does this mean? So beset by concepts of identity that emerge from proliferation. So we're talking about this word papancha. Right? This word is proliferating of perceptions. So we perceive. What do we perceive? Right? When we're little babies, we start to have some consciousness. We perceive we're called this name. We perceive that we're this being in the world, and this being has contact with the world. Right? We perceive all of these experiences, all of this contact, and then we papancha identity out of it. This is the papancha is one of my favorite words that goes along with another Pali word called manyati. Manyati is often used for like creation of identity. But one of my favorite ways to translate it, when I looked it up in the Pali dictionary, is imagination. So the Buddha is really kind of like a master at using multiple meanings for a word. And so the Buddha is basically talking with these two words about how we essentially imagine, we create. That's what a sankhara is, volitional formation, right? We're creating. We create this, what do they call it? The concept of identity based on papanchaing of our perceptions. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, just this is the end of underlying tendencies to desire, repulsion. So this is, let me see the Pali here. Patigha Asa. Raga. Okay. So raga and patigha. So like craving, like desire and repulsion. This is attachment and aversion. These are essentially synonyms for lobha and dosa, right? This is lobha, dosa, moha, greed, hatred, and delusion, attachment, aversion, and delusion. So this is somebody, so if they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source, so what arises? The five aggregates arise. Thoughts arise. Contact arises. Perceptions arise. But what don't they do? They don't approve of it. They don't welcome it. They don't get attached to it. So they are not papanchaing. They are not manyatiing. They're not imagining. They're not creating. This is important. Just this is the end of underlying tendencies. So in the sutta that I always talk about, the sutta of the arrow, the Buddha talks about underlying tendencies. The underlying tendency when we experience something pleasant is to grasp at it, to attach to it, to want more of it. The underlying tendency when we experience something unpleasant is to run away from it and to drown ourselves in something pleasant. So this is where the Buddha is talking about our underlying tendencies: to desire, repulsion, to views, to doubt, conceit, the desire to be reborn, and the desire for and ignorance. This is the end of taking up the rod and the sword, the end of quarrels, arguments, and disputes, of accusations, divisive speech, and lies. So think about all of these problems that arise, right, that are ended by what? By abandoning this papancha, by abandoning this manyati, this creation and propagation, by not attaching to what we experience, thinking of it as me, mine, myself. When we don't do that, well, what's there to quarrel about? What's there to fight about? You know? Why am I going to take up the rod and the sword? This is where these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. This is what the Buddha said. When he had spoken, the Holy One got up from his seat and entered his dwelling. Soon after the Buddha left, those mendicants considered. The Buddha gave this brief passage for recitation, then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. Who can explain in detail the meaning of this brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha? Just going to check the chat here. Who do we have with us? Hello, Jared. Welcome. And Gregory, welcome. Okay. So we continue our reading through the Madhupindika Sutta. Then those mendicants thought, this venerable Mahakachana is praised by the Buddha and esteemed by his sensible spiritual companions. He is capable of explaining in detail the meaning of this brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. And if I'm not mistaken, which I could be, but if I'm not mistaken, this is actually Mahakachana is the foremost in actually being able to do this, explaining in detail what the Buddha says in brief. At least that's what my memory is telling me. My perception could be quite off, but at least this is what comes up. So he is. Oh, Bhikkhu Bodhi has a footnote saying that? All right. Okay, good. So my perception was correct this time. This time. He is capable of explaining. Let's go to him and ask him about this matter. Then those mendicants went to Mahakachana and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, they sat down to one side. They told him what had happened and said. So then it's they explain all that stuff that just happened. May Venerable Mahakachana please explain this. Reverence. Suppose there was a person in need of heartwood. And while wandering in search of heartwood, he'd come across a large tree standing with heartwood. But he'd pass over the roots and trunk, imagining that the heartwood should be sought in the branches and leaves. Such is the consequence for the venerables. Though you were face to face with the Buddha, you overlooked him, imagining that you should ask me about this matter. For he is the Buddha who knows and sees. He is vision. He is vision. That's an interesting translation. I think I remember coming up with that though before looking at that, and I think that is actually accurate if I remember correctly. That has come up to me before. What does it say?
He is vision in the sense that he is the leader in vision.
Okay, so even Bhikkhu Bodhi says he is vision. All right, that's good. He is knowledge. He is the manifestation of principle. He is the manifestation of divinity. He is the teacher, the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning, and the bestower of the deathless, the Lord of truth, the realized one. That was the time to approach the Buddha and ask him about this matter. You should have remembered that in line with the Buddha's answer. Certainly, he is the Buddha who knows and sees. He is vision. He is knowledge. He is the manifestation of principle. He is the manifestation of divinity. He is the teacher, the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning, the bestower of the deathless, the Lord of truth, the realized one. That was the time to approach the Buddha and ask him about this matter. We should have remembered in line with the Buddha's answer. Still, Mahakachana is praised by the Buddha and esteemed by his sensible spiritual companions. You are capable of explaining in detail the meaning of this brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. Please explain this if it's no trouble. Yes, Reverend, they replied. Well, with them, Reverends. Listen and pay close attention. I will speak. Yes, Reverend, they replied. Venerable Mahakachana said this. Reverends, the Buddha gave this brief passage for recitation, then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. A person is beset by concepts of identity that emerge from proliferation of perceptions. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, ... This is where bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of this passage from recitation. And so he continues, eye consciousness arises dependent on eye and sights. The meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate about is the source from which a person is beset by concepts of identity. that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. This occurs with respect to sights known by the eye in the past, future, and present. Ear consciousness arises dependent on ear and sounds. Nose consciousness arises dependent on nose and smells. Tongue consciousness arises dependent on tongue and tastes. Body consciousness arises dependent on the body and touches. Mind consciousness arises dependent on mind and thoughts. The meaning of the three is contact. Contact is the condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate about is the source from which a person is beset by concepts of identity that emerge from proliferation of perceptions. This occurs with respect to thoughts known by the mind in the past, present, and the future. When there is the I, Anthony is coming in with some Pali for us. Let's see what he says here. Oh, yeah, Anthony was talking about when we were talking about the Buddha is who sees. All right. When there is I, sights, and I consciousness, it is possible to point out what's known as contact. When there is what's known as contact, it is possible to point out what's known as feeling. When there is what's known as feeling, it is possible to point out what's known as perception. When there is what's known as perception, it is possible to point out what's known as thought. When there is what's known as thought, it is possible to point out what's known as being beset by concepts of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. When there is ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, thoughts, and mind consciousness, it's possible to point out what's known as contact. So actually, since this is a wordy sutta so far, I do want to stop and just, if anybody in the chat or here with us, anybody need any clarification of anything that's been said so far? Give it a minute just to see if anybody responds. And then if not, we'll continue on. All right, let's keep going. When there is the ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, thoughts, and mind consciousness, it's possible to point out what's known as contact. When there is what's known as thought, it's possible to point out what's known as being beset by a concept of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. Just checking the Pali real quick. Okay. When there is no I, no sights, and no I consciousness, it's quite impossible to point out what's known as contact. When there isn't what's known as contact, it's not possible to point out what's known as feeling. When there isn't what's known as feeling, it's not possible to point out what's known as perception. And so one thing also that I should point out is here, we have dependent origination in this sutta. This is basically dependent origination. Is it exactly the 12 steps that's, in most suttas? No. But there are actually other suttas where other steps are put in and some steps are even omitted. So the dependent origination is something that is, not just the 12 steps. That's something that should be understood. Actually, most of you probably heard me, the way the Buddha describes dependent origination in 2 lines. When this arises, this arises. When this ceases, that ceases. That's dependent origination. And so dependent origination, the 12 steps, is precisely and only concerned with how a being stays in the samsaric journey. Dependent origination in terms of this arises, this ceases, that ceases. That's all conditioned existence. That's basically everything. You can observe this in your mind and everything around you, at least to a little degree. To get to a much, much deeper degree, you'd probably have to be an arhat, or at least close enough to it. When there isn't what's known as feeling, it's not possible to point out what's known as perception. And so this is following the dependent cessation framework. First of all, first we went dependent origination. Well, this is arising, and then we can understand this. Now it's, well, this is not here anymore, so now we can't understand that. When there isn't what's known as perception, it's not possible to point out what's known as thought. When there isn't what's known as thought, it's not possible to point out what's known as being beset by concepts of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. This is an interesting. So the being beset by concepts of identity that emerge from proliferation of perceptions is one long Pali word. That's why it sounds like. So let me see if I can even. Papancha sanya sankara samudaya samudaya. That's arising. Samudachara panyating. That's this. It's one Pali word, and that you do see that occasionally, but that's why it's basically one line. And even Bhante Sujato has like little apostrophe marks on either end of it. When there's no ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no thoughts, and no mind consciousness, it's not possible to point out what's known as contact. When there isn't what's known as thought, it's not possible to point out what's known as being beset by concepts of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of that brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. Oh, Joshi had a question. I didn't understand the part about underlying. You mean underlying tendencies? Clarify that for me if you can, Joshi. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of that brief passage for the recitation given by the Buddha. If you wish, you may go to the Buddha and ask him about this. You should remember it in line with the Buddha's answer. Yes, Reverend, said those mendicants, approving and agreeing with what Maggasekha said. Then they rose from their seats and went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what happened. Then they said, Maggasekha clearly explained the meaning to us in this manner with these words and phrases. Maggasekha is astute, mendicants. He has great wisdom. If you came to me and asked this question, I would answer it in the exact same way as Maggasekha. That is what it means, and that is how you should remember it. When he said this, Venerable Ananda said to the Buddha, Sir, suppose a person who was weak with hunger was to obtain a honey cake. Wherever they taste it, they would enjoy a sweet, delicious flavor. In the same way, wherever a sincere, capable mendicant might examine with wisdom the meaning of this exposition of the teaching, they would only gain joy and clarity. Sir, what is the name of this exposition of the teaching? Well, Ananda, you may remember this exposition of the teaching as the honey cake discourse. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Ananda was happy with what the Buddha said. Sadhu. All right. So, do we have any questions, comments, clarifications? We have a little bit of a time before we would do our normal meditation. So, we can discuss some things. I know you wanted to ask me a question, and I said we do it at 5, but then we never ended up doing. What did you want me to talk to you about? Why I chose the Theravadan school out of all the schools of Buddhism. All right. Mostly out of my ignorance, for the most part. No. So when by the time I knew that I wanted a spiritual path, and I knew Buddhism was going to be it. Actually, by that point, I had probably never actually made contact with anything Theravada. I mostly knew Tibetan, Dalai Lama, a little bit of Zen, but not as much. So I kind of started there, and that was actually the closest thing to me was this Mongolian Vajrayana temple in was it Manalapan, New Jersey, so like north of me, where I was living. And I went there and I learned a little bit from. There was this Westerner lay teacher. There was a monastic there, but he didn't really speak much English. He didn't do any of the teaching. There's this older gentleman who was like kind of lay lama teacher, whatever. And I learned a little bit from him. And I got this book, and it didn't click with me. It was a bit too esoteric, and a lot of the practices, like kind of ritualistic practices in what I saw in Vajrayana was a bit too close to the Christianity that I left. And it wasn't something that I felt connected to or that I wanted. And the same thing with a little bit of, I wouldn't say probably my journey of what kind of Buddhism for me was probably no more than like a year and a half. It wasn't like a decade, figuring out. But I remember like reading more. I think it was even maybe a Wikipedia article. This is like 2007. I don't know if Wikipedia was around then, but I remember reading of like Theravada is the most orthodox of a Buddhist thing, and yada yada is the closest. And I'm like, actually, that sounds like me. Maybe that's what I want. And when I got into it, I was like, oh yeah, I think this is actually right. This is actually good. There's not, later on I would find out like most of the stuff that I kind of didn't like from the Vajrayana and the Mahayana is also in the Theravada as well. So I realized this is what I mean by ignorance. Is like, because I went through this phase. Theravada is the best. All these other ones, they're all late and they don't know what they're talking about, and they're all kind of weird things in there and all that. But I think even more than like Theravada and Mahayana, what connected with me was when I started to hear the suttas and how practical and how pragmatic and just down to earth they were. The Vajrayana and even a lot of the Mahayana can be very like esoteric, very kind of like, like just tell it to me straight. Like this, I'm a guy from New Jersey. I just want to hear somebody tell it to me straight. And that's what I saw in the suttas. I saw in the suttas that the Buddha was just telling it to me straight. And the Buddha says, I teach as a teacher with an open palm, not a closed fist, right? There's no like you reach a certain level and then I'll tell you more of Buddha's teachings. There's no, and I tell people there's no like super secret monastic noble, eightfold path. Right? The noble eightfold path is the same for monks, the same for lay people. It's the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And so that's really, I think, what really caught me. Like that's really what kept me wanting to learn more and wanting to practice more were these very basic teachings. Right? The Buddha, reading the suttas and the Buddha like acting like my psychotherapist, basically just telling me all of my neuroses and all of my problems and all of my tendencies. And I'm like, yep, he's right. Right. So that's really kind of where that was like my progression, where in all honesty, like in my own mind, I don't consider myself a Theravada practitioner. Because so much of Theravada I don't really practice. But for all intents and purposes, I'm a Theravada monastic. So it's kind of like the mundane versus the transcendent. It's like in my mind, I'm not really Theravadan, but if I had to like spend 30 minutes in explaining why I'm not Theravadan to every person I meet, I would have no time of the day for anything else. So basically, I'm just a Theravada monastic. But it's, because there's lots of in Theravada that I don't really follow, like Abhidhamma, a lot of the commentarial views on things. I'm not wholly against the commentaries. Honestly, most of them are translated in English, and I don't know most of them. So it's kind of ignorant for me to say I'm against something I really haven't read myself. But yeah, so that's kind of where my progression of where I ended up landing, and where my main focus is the early Buddhist texts. Like that's kind of my focus of how I practice. So this was actually somewhat similar to a person's first question. An ancient path had asked, can we give any weight to other traditions that use the sutras outside of the canon, or are they in direct contradiction of the Buddha's words? So it's somewhat similar in that regard. But Joshi says, are you a Suttavada? I used to use that term, but I don't anymore. And the reason being is because I actually found out that one of the old 18 schools was actually called Suttavada. And so they have very specific perspectives and things like that. So I was like, okay, wait a second. I got to be careful about this term. I mean, if you just go by Suttavada meaning, so what does Theravada mean? Tara is elders. Vada means creed, or what do they call it? Doctrine. Right. So you could call it elders' creed or elders' doctrine. So Suttavada would be the doctrine or the creed of the suttas, and I don't know. I don't know. I was like, until I kind of understood more about that word, I used it, because there are monastics. There are a few. There's a handful that do use that word. But once I heard like Bhante Sujato and Ajahn Brahmali and Bhante and Alio using early Buddhist texts, EBTs, like, okay, that's my designation. I'm an EBT practitioner and sharer of Dhamma. That's what you're going to get from me. Every once in a while, you might get something else. Like, that when I talk about metta and compassion, I always have to bring out somebody who I always cringe at having to bring out. But at least in this case, they're 100% right? And remember, I always talk about Mr. Crazy Wisdom and his wonderful term that I learned from Pema Chodron called idiot compassion, right? Is this in the suttas? Technically, no, at least not spelled out. I would say it's intrinsically in the suttas, yes. Is it extrinsic? Like, is it like the Buddha? Does the Buddha have a idiot compassion sutta? No, obviously not. But should all your actions and your emotions be tempered with wisdom? Yes, the Buddha talks about this quite often. So, so every once in a while, you will hear me kind of break out something that's not specifically early Buddhist text, but it's at least in line with the early texts. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's what I am in terms of what you're going to get from me, and where I study and how I. Oh, I remember what I wanted to say. So any kind of monastic or teacher that I hear, like if they give a talk, or any kind of sutra or anything that I end up reading, I judge that monastic or that teacher or that sutra by my understanding of the early texts. And if they're way off, then they're not. So I'll give an example. Most of Thai forest is not really in line with the early texts. They go all over the place. There's one exemption that I can give. And again, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Ajahn Mun is fully in line with the early Buddhist text, but there's not as much teachings of his that's available. So I can't really judge it. But the one exemption is Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah, in my opinion, is much more in line with the suttas than even a lot of his disciples that came after him. Even a lot of the Western disciples that came after him. And the reason is this: I've listened to and I've read every available Ajahn Chah teaching that's in existence, and I've never once seen him say anything that contradicts the suttas. Never once. You know, you have some teachers you see like, oh, like the one who knows, and he does mention that, but he does it in a way that does not go kind of off the rails that some others I have. So like Ajahn, this is why I will always talk about Ajahn Chah, because he's always I've never seen him not in line with the suttas, and his teachings have been probably more impactful to me than any other teacher in existence. Any teacher. Now I've had a line of amazing teachers. Right? I've had Bhante Gunaratana is one, obviously, but Ajahn Chah, his Dhamma is just amazing. Bhante Ji's Dhamma is amazing, but that's because he doesn't have his own Dhamma. He's always talking about the Buddha. He's always pointing to the Buddha. So it's kind of a different, thing. But I remember listening to one of Ajahn Chah's talks, and he brought up a simile. And he doesn't say the simile is from the suttas, but I knew it was from the suttas because I had just read this obscure sutta with this obscure simile that I never heard any monk talk about before. Not even in a famous sutta. And he gives this simile, and I'm like, I just read this simile. Ajahn Chah knows. This is amazing. Like he's just, yeah. So I can talk about Ajahn Chah all day. but anyway, the idea is though that I judge a person's teaching by that framework of the suttas, of the early texts.
Creativity or like a departure from the suttas, maybe not like a departure in the sense of like a contradiction, but like an extension or maybe like a slight alteration. I hear a lot of people in my house. I know this comes from different schools, but like a lot of people in my house like that. Like that's like the whole thing.
Okay. So yeah, so the question was kind of like, is there any room in my my view of things for kind of like creativity or changing things around and things like that? And well, I think that me accepting a teaching of crazy wisdom is example of that. Like, I mean, like I do like, so this is how do you know Crazy Wisdom? Do you know when I talk about, okay. So he's he's the creator of the Shambhala school. And he was this monk / lay teacher who is very famous for like drugs and sex and boozing and all this kind of stuff. That's why he's called Crazy Wisdom. And so, yeah, so like normally, like most people from the Theravada school is like if you're a teacher who's drugging and sexing and boozing, we're not going to listen to you. And so I feel the same way, but he's on point when he talks about crazy wisdom. So, I mean, somebody I've heard somebody say, yeah, well, a broken clock is right twice a day. I don't know, but I am. So this is how I am. I will not spend any personal time learning other teachings, because the way I look at it is the suttas are 5,000 pages long, and that's more than enough study for one lifetime. So my triage, my focus is going to be on those suttas. But if I hang out with the Mahayana monastic and something I learned from that is really impactful, then yeah, I adapt it. Like, for instance, I don't care for the whole bodhisattva thing. I'm not big onto, oh, I like this bodhisattva or that bodhisattva, nor do I care about what's the one who's we have lots of statues of her here, Avalokiteshvara, whatever. I don't know the other word. So I'm not like into like, oh, I like it's not my thing. But I remember my first retreat was at a Mahayana monastery because I had no Theravada contact at that point. And they, these two Chinese bhikshunis were talking about this bodhisattva. And I remember this bodhisattva to this day because I loved the way they explained it. It's called the non-disparaging bodhisattva. And this bodhisattva would like go around and he was like, I recognize your Buddha nature. I would never disparage you. I never say. And these two Chinese bhikshunis are explaining how he's like, he annoyed the townspeople so much they're throwing clods at him and he's running away saying, I recognize your Buddha nature. I would never discourage you. And I was like, okay, I like him. I like this guy. Yeah, this is a good lesson there too, right? It's a good lesson in like recognizing that even if people are, throwing you out of the town with clods, you recognize their humanity, their humanness, their Buddha nature, whatever. You recognize that positivity, that positiveness in them. I think that's a really cool thing. I like that. So I'm not closed-minded, but I am closed in focus, basically. So yeah.
Theravada, doctrine of the elders. Which elders are they talking about?
So the question is, which elders are they talking about in Theravada? That's a good question. Well, Theragata, right? So they're talking about like those early arahants that kind of were that group that were the hardliners that didn't allow the Mahasangika views of things coming in, and so it kind of split from there. So that's essentially what they're talking about. They're talking about those arahants that were part of that group that didn't believe in the newer views, basically. I don't know that it's the first council. I think it might be the second council that came in. It's either the second or the third council where you start to see the disagreements on things. Yeah. All right. So it's past 9:00. I see no other questions or comments in the chat. Why don't we do meditation? And then after the meditation, we'll read some Dhammapada verses, and I think we'll call it a night. All right, so set yourself up in whatever position is comfortable and stable for you. We'll practice some scanning through the body, starting with the feet and moving up to the head. Remember, we do this for two reasons. The first is to slowly bring the mind from the external focus, what's going on in the live stream and the room around us, to the internal focus, this mind and body. And the second reason is to practice understanding our posture and adjusting our posture in such a way that we minimize pain and discomfort as we sit for longer periods of time. So bring your focus and attention to your feet. By bringing focus and attention, this means to pay close attention to whatever sensation or feeling is arising at that part of the body, such as the feeling of the feet pressing against the floor, the cushion, the opposite leg, etc. Move up through the ankles into the calves. As you're moving through the body, if you're noticing a small feeling of discomfort or noticing an imbalance in your posture, now is the time to move and adjust as much as you need. Ideally, we want to move as little as possible once we start following the breath. Move up through the knees into the thighs. Up through to the hips and pelvis. This is an important part of your posture, as the position of the pelvis impacts the legs and the spine. Pay close attention to this part of the body. When you're ready, move up the spine through the abdomen and the chest. Check to see if the spine is leaning or slouching here or there. Ideally, you want the spine to be resting in its neutral position, not slouched over or pushed straight like a rod. Both will eventually cause back pain and other issues. Moving up to the shoulders, making sure they're hanging loosely, not scrunched up and tight. Down through to the elbows and hands. Observe how their position also impacts your spine, your upper body posture. And finally up to the head. Also checking that the head is not leaning and slouching left or right, forward or backwards. Chin parallel to the floor. When you're done setting up your body in a comfortable and stable position, let the body go and take 3 deep breaths. And then let the breath go. From here on in, try not to manipulate or control the breath in any way. This body has been breathing from the moment you were born and will continue to do so until the second you die. Does it need you to do its job? Your job for now is to simply observe, investigate, and abide with the breath as the body breathes in and breathes out. Now I'll give some instructions on the metta practice that we will be doing for this session. The practice of metta often uses words and visuals, but the words and visuals are not the end of the practice. They're simply a means to an end. The purpose of practicing metta is to abandon all ill will, agitation, anger, resentments in our minds, and to develop warm-hearted feelings of friendliness for all beings without distinction. So I'll be offering words and visuals during this practice. You can choose to use them as you wish. We'll be practicing exalted release of mind through metta, where we send our metta out to ever larger numbers of beings. But we should start with the being that you may have the most agitation towards, anger towards, maybe even hatred towards. That person is ourselves. If we have no goodwill, friendliness for ourselves, we cannot spread it out and give it to all beings. So if you like, you can imagine a sphere around you, a circle not much larger than your body. And as we say the words and use the visuals, you can imagine filling that sphere up with your goodwill, your friendliness, like air filling a balloon. Repeat these words silently in your mind. May I find happiness. May I find peace. May I live in friendship with all beings. May I find release from suffering. When you say these words, they're not meant to be repeated over and over again like a mantra. With each line you say, try to do so sincerely, like speaking to a best friend or a close relative, with an honest and sincere wish that the person does know what is good and find these things. Repeat again. This time, if you like, you can visualize yourself in front of you, like looking in a mirror. You can say the words to that image. May I find happiness. May I find peace. May I live in friendship with all beings. May I find release from suffering. Repeat. May I find happiness. May I find peace. May I live in friendship with all beings. May I find release from suffering. When you do this practice on your own, I encourage you to spend as much time as you need saying the words for yourself, building up that goodwill and friendliness towards yourself, speaking to yourself in kind words. And then when you're ready, you start to spread that sphere out to encompass the entirety of whatever building you're in, all the beings in it, human, animal, insects, beings you can see and beings you can't. If you have a good image of that building in your mind, you can imagine it completely surrounded by your sphere of goodwill and friendliness, permeating and pervading the whole building. Repeat the words. May all of us in this building find happiness. May all of us find peace. May all of us live in friendship with each other. May all of us find release from suffering. From here on in, we will use all of us because all of us always includes you. You are always at the center of that sphere, no matter how many other beings we include within it. Spread your sphere to encompass the entirety of whatever town, village, city that you're in. However many beings, human, animal, insects, other. Repeat the words. May all of us in this city find happiness. May all of us find peace. May all of us live in friendship with each other. May all of us find release from suffering. Spread your sphere to encompass the entirety of whatever state or region or province that you're in. However many millions of beings. May all of us in this region find happiness. May all of us find peace. May all of us live in friendship with each other. May all of us find release from suffering. Spread your sphere out to encompass whatever country that you're in. You have a good image of that country in your mind. You can imagine it completely surrounded and pervaded with your sphere of goodwill, of metta. May all of us in this country find happiness. May all of us find peace. May all of us live in friendship with each other. May all of us find release from suffering. Remember, when we practice metta, we do so like the sun shines its rays down on all beings, without distinction, categorization, discrimination. When we practice metta, things like religious affiliation, political affiliation, sex, gender, race, sports team, whatever ways we group ourselves and others into, these don't matter to metta. Metta is limitless, expansive. There's plenty of goodwill for you to give to all beings in samsara. Spread your sphere out now to the entirety of this planet Earth. Trillions of beings in the air, land, and sea. A small blue dot in a sea of darkness teeming with life. Completely encapsulate and surround the earth with your sphere of goodwill, friendliness. Repeat the words. May all of us find happiness. May all of us find peace. May all of us live in friendship with each other. May all of us find release from suffering. Friends, when we practice metta, we don't expect that all beings across the planet will hold hands and sing songs in peace and harmony. There's no utopian messages or utopian expectations when it comes to metta. But we can work on the hatred and ill will in our own minds And have that sincere wish that other beings will do the same. But that's up to them. Our job is not done yet. Continue to spread your sphere of metta out into the cosmos to encompass the entirety of this Milky Way, our home galaxy with hundreds of billions of planets and stars. Who knows how many beings? Even if we don't know beings exist, whether out on other planets or even devas and nagas and such on Earth, we never want to limit our goodwill. Whatever beings may exist, we encompass the entirety of the Milky Way and say the words. May all of us in this galaxy find happiness. May all of us find peace. May all of us live in friendship with each other. May all of us find release from suffering. Now spread your sphere out to encompass the entirety of the known universe, the whole universe. If there's dimensions, multiverses, whatever there might be out there, wherever there might be beings in the samsaric state, fellow siblings in suffering, omitting none, sending your sphere out to infinity. May all of us in the samsaric state find happiness. May all of us find peace. May all of us live in friendship with each other. May all of us find release from suffering. Slowly start to come back through the universe, galaxy, back to Earth, down through to the room you're in, opening your eyes, becoming aware of the room around you. Reflect on the state of your mind now and how it might be different from before the meditation. And, well, I do see a little bit of a question. Joshi, are you still on? If you're not on anymore, I'm not going to bother answering. Well, maybe if you check it later. I'll cover this question, or if there's any other questions. Is this the first time you've done this metta practice, like how I taught? No? Yeah. Joshi is here. So, what is the difference in the scope between Theravada and early Buddhist texts as far as authoritative texts go? The word authoritative text is kind of like I don't know. I don't use the term because who's authorizing, right? Like I could say, well, that Visuddhimagga is not authoritative because it's not yada yada yada, but it's also probably the most important document in Theravada. So I mean, yeah, I don't get into the I don't like to get into the whole what's authoritative and what's not. The early Buddhist texts are just simply the suttas in and of themselves. That's all. And how each person chooses to use the various texts is up to their tradition and up to them. Joshi says Theravada is Pali Canon plus commentaries plus Abhidhamma plus Vinaya. Yeah. Actually, I think some people might say that the canon is not the commentaries. I'm not sure. That's a little bit of a debated thing back and forth. But at minimum, it's Sutta, Vinaya, and Abhidhamma. Good night, Gregory. Good to see you on. Yeah, we are coming to the end here. Did you have any question about that metta practice that we did? No? All right, cool. Okay, so why don't we read some Dhammapada and then close out? Let me share screen. Of course, we are reading Dhammapada by my favorite translation and also widely considered to be among the best translations, which is also on Sutta Central by Acharya Buddharakkhita. Not to be confused with our friend from Uganda, Bhante Buddharakkhita. This is a much, much older and now long deceased Bhante. The world. Follow not the vulgar way. Live not in heedlessness. Hold not to false views. Linger not long in worldly existence. I like it. This is such a wonderful line. Follow not the vulgar way. Live not in heedlessness. Hold not false views. Linger not long in worldly existence. I don't know. Go look at whatever it says, the section on the world. Yeah. It's towards the middle / end of the book. Yeah. Arise, do not be heedless. Lead a righteous life. The righteous live happily both in this world and the next. Lead a righteous life. Lead not a base life. The righteous live happily both in this world and the next. One who looks upon the world as a bubble, as a mirage. Him the kingdom of death, or the king of death, Mara, sees not. Come, behold this world, which is like a decorated royal chariot. Here fools flounder, but the wise have no attachment to it. He who, having been heedless, is heedless no more, illuminates the world like the moon freed from the clouds. He who by good deeds covers the evil he has done, illuminates this world like the moon free from the clouds. Blind is the world. Here only a few possess insight. Only a few, like birds escaping from the net, go to the realm of bliss. Swans fly on the path of the sun. Men pass through the air by psychic powers. The wise are led away from the world after vanquishing Mara and his host. For a liar who has violated the one law of truthfulness, who holds in scorn the hereafter, there is no evil that he cannot do. Truly, misers fare not to heavenly realms, nor, indeed, do fools praise generosity. But the wise man rejoices in giving, and by that alone does he become happy hereafter. Better than sole sovereignty over the earth, better than going to heaven, better even than lordship over all the worlds, is the supramundane fruition of stream entry. Let's see. I think we can do the next one. We have some time. Oh, sure, yeah.
I don't know, what is 75 or 175? Swans fly on the path of the sun, men pass through the air by psychic powers. The wise are led away from the world after vanquishing Mara and his host. Wait, what does it mean by men pass, or swans fly on the path of the sun and men pass through the air by psychic powers?
Oh, well, that's one of the psychic powers. You can basically just, well, in like Sri Lanka and like a lot of the Buddhist traditions, there's like, I remember hearing this song that the Sri Lankans chant, and it talks about arahants like in the seated position flying through the air and things like that. Yeah. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's a psychic power. Yeah.
And the next one, 176. For a liar who has violated the one law of truthfulness, who holds in scorn the hereafter, there is no evil that he cannot do. Just because I'm a liar, does that mean there's no evil I can't do?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. The Buddha says that equivocally. Yeah. In multiple places, the Buddha says this. Yes. Yeah. He holds speech and truthfulness in speech above basically all of these things, right? Because if you're able to tell something that is not true, you're also able to fool yourself into believing things that are not true. You accept untruths. You accept the lies of Mara, and you cause yourself lots of suffering and other people lots of harm. So that's why. And the Buddha takes really strong stances on a bunch of things, like anger. Right? He never approves of any anger. Killing. He never approves of any killing except for the killing of anger. So you'll see, in the suttas, the Buddha on certain things, he does not budge. He just tells it straight. And it seems extreme because people are like, well, what about white lies? And, they'll say all kinds of different things like that. But ideally, the best thing to do is try not to lie to yourself or others. Yeah, I think that's the ideal thing to do.
This one, it's a reference to the word Dhamma, which is the law of truthfulness, but with a small t.
Anthony says sadhu. Yes. All right. So let's go to the Buddhas. By what track can you trace that trackless Buddha of limitless range, whose victory nothing can undo, whom none of the vanquished defilements can ever pursue? So you see this is kind of related a little bit to the whole birds in the sky and the arahants in the sky thing. The Buddha is talking about, and he also mentioned where Mara cannot follow, right? So the Buddha is talking about arahants, people who are awakened. Their path is like trying to find the path of a bird in the sky, right? It's not the same as an animal that has footprints in the ground. So Mara cannot see. The evil defilements cannot see one, right? The Buddha here says the trackless Buddha of limitless range, right? His range and his abilities are unable to be seen by others who are not also Buddhas, basically. By what track can you trace the trackless Buddha of limitless range, in whom exists no longer the entangling and embroiling craving that perpetuates becoming? So that bhava, it's like it perpetuates rebirth, basically coming back again and again. Those wise ones who are devoted to meditation and who delight in the calm of renunciation, such mindful ones, supreme Buddhas, even the gods hold dear. Hard is it to be born a man. Hard is the life of mortals. Hard is it to gain the opportunity of hearing the sublime truth. And hard to encounter is the arising of the Buddhas. And so here, man is being used as like human, like humanity. So basically, we know from various suttas how rare it is to be a human. Right, from the simile of the turtle putting its head through the noose in the great ocean and things like that. So this is where the Buddha is explaining this is quite hard. To avoid all evil, to cultivate the good, and to cleanse one's mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. This is from the Ovada Patimokkha. Oh, actually, this is the Ovada Patimokkha. Here we go. Enduring patience is the highest austerity. Kanti paramang tapotitika. Patient endurance is the highest practice. Nibbana is supreme, say the Buddhas. He is not a true monk who harms others, nor a true renunciant who oppresses others. Not despising, not harming, restrained according to the code of monastic discipline. Moderation in food, dwelling in solitude, devotion to meditation. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. There is no satisfying sensual desires, even with the rain of gold coins. For sensual pleasures gives little satisfaction and much pain. Having understood this, the wise man finds no delight even in heavenly pleasures. The disciple of the Supreme Buddha delights in the destruction of craving. Driven only by fear, do men go for refuge to many places. Hey, that's the chant we did when we started the Dhammapalooza today with, right? They go to refuge to many places, to the forest, trills, and same things. Such indeed is no safe refuge. Such is not the refuge supreme. We did this chant. This is an interesting, what would you call, maybe not coincidence. Such is not the refuge supreme. Not by resorting to such a refuge is one released from all suffering. He who has gone for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the Buddha, the teaching, and his order, penetrates with transcendental wisdom the Four Noble Truths, suffering, the cause of suffering, and the cessation of suffering, and the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to the cessation of suffering. This indeed is the safe refuge. This is the refuge supreme. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. Hard to find is the thoroughbred man, the Buddha. He is not born everywhere. Where such a wise man is born, the clan thrives happily. Blessed is the birth of the Buddhas. Blessed is the enunciation of the sacred teaching. Blessed is the harmony of the order. And blessed is the spiritual pursuit of the united truth seeker. He who reveres those worthy of reverence, the Buddha and their disciples, who have transcended all obstacles and passed beyond the reach of sorrow and lamentation, He who reveres such peaceful, fearless ones, his merit none can compute by any measure. All right, friends. I think this is good enough for us to do our business and then share merit and close out for the night. Let's break out the banners. Okay. So if you are new to this is your first time with Dhammapalooza or anything of myself or the organization Maggasekha, well then welcome. And you can find out more information about us on the website that's scrolling at the bottom of the screen here, maggasekha.org, maggasekha.org. That's the Pali that means student of the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. And so on this website, you can find every time I post a new article or a new video or announcements for retreats, all these different kind of things you can find there. In the top right, you can put your email in the box, and every time I post, you'll get an email. Same thing on YouTube. You can click subscribe, click the bell, do all that jazz. And then anytime I put up a new video, you can also get notified in that way. So as long as I am in a place I'm able to do my various activities, every Monday, as you've seen, every Monday, 8 p.m. New York time, we have Dhammapalooza. Wednesdays, when I have the energy, I do try to post Ask Abante videos. People will send me questions to answer on video, and I try to post those. I have been having some energy issues lately these days, as you might have seen in various Dhammapaloozas. I think the only reason why I'm quite energetic now is because of coffee and friends here in the same room with me. Other than that, I would probably be much more tired, as I have been. But anyway, so Wednesdays I might post Ask Abante. Saturdays on Insight Timer at 3 o'clock New York time. I do my Insight Timer session. So if you are on Insight Timer, you can join us there. And Sundays on the Maggasekha Discord, we have our sutta readings. Right? Maggasekha Discord is 7 years old now this month. And we've been reading the suttas every Sunday for those 7 years. We've gone through thousands of pages of suttas. We just had a really good session yesterday with myself and Ayasu Dhamma and Venerable Pasana, who's a bhikkhuni in Australia, and a few of our lay friends. We read the suttas last night, Sunday night. So if you are interested in checking out the Maggasekha community on the Discord program, this is a community that is based both in study and practice in the early Buddhist text, the suttas. If that sounds interesting to you, you can send an email to the email on the screen, maggasekha@gmail.com, and ask for an invite, and we'll send you an invite to join us. So, and we do our sutta readings on there every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. All right, let's share our merits, close out. Share the screen here. Okay. Dukkha patta chani dukkha, bhaya patta chani bhaya, soka patta chani soka, hantu sabbe pipaniyo, etta vata cha mehi sampatang punya sampatang, sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sanpatti siddhya, akasata chabumata deva naga mahiddhika punyang tang anumoditva charang rakantu sasanang. May the suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit of ours that we've thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas, nagas, and yakas of mighty power, share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, friends, that is another Dhammapalooza in the books. Well, until next time, friends, Sukhi Hotu, practice well and be well. May you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again. Have a good week.